for our streaming platforms to catch up here. We are talking about the freedom to be limited in this last chapter of our book study. So give me 1 minute here as we try to catch up. There we go. Coming through. Hopefully y'all can see me, hear me, and we'll get started here. Wonderful. All right. Here we are. We're talking about the freedom to be limited. Welcome, welcome. Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining. Here we are on this beautiful Friday, May 8th, Friday afternoon. Today we're talking about, the freedom to be limited. And we're here at the last chapter. So I'll give a moment for everybody to arrive here in our book study. But we are talking about the human dis-ease. And the human dis-ease is all about understanding that we have these underlying beliefs, these preoccupations that stop us from this ease of life, that hold us back from living fully. And so we're getting started here on our last chapter, chapter 14 of 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals with Oliver Burkeman. And in this closing, we're going to be looking at a couple of these kind of big themes and kind of sharing some of my personal reflections as we've been reading this, especially on what I like to call radical humanity. And radical humanity is the choice to hold ourselves to a human standard, to understand that we really are all limited. And we resist our limitations because we're afraid of death. As the existential psychotherapist held, all of our psychological defenses stem from our fear of death. And this fear of being limited is just another symptom of this fear of death. And even in our American culture, in the Western culture, this need to produce, it's based on this fear of death, this unwillingness to accept our human limitations. And radical humanity, to me, I like that word, radical humanity. And my wife said to me, she's like, you sure you want to use the word radical? Because, radical has such a negative connotation in the kind of politically charged landscape that we live in. And I said, that's exactly why I want to use the word radical. Because to me, radical humanity is a deep and abiding commitment to our shared humanity. Not to the things that separate us, but to the things that bring us together. And radical humanity, to me, means starting out with this kind of forgiveness of ourselves for being human, forgiveness of ourselves for being mortals. So radical humanity is about living in accord with our limitations, rather than fighting against them. To recognize that we will fall and we will fail over and over and over and over and over again. And our task in that moment we fall and we fail is simply to begin again. You see, each moment, this moment right here, it's absolutely, completely new. And so you may be tuning in to this Instagram Live. You might be listening to this later on, but I want to just invite you to recognize that in this moment is completely new. You've never been here before. And this is the beauty of the present moment. When we surrender to it, we let go of our thoughts about how things should be, how things need to be, how things can or can't be. And instead, as the Zen Buddhist tradition says, we flow like water around the rocks rather than fighting with them. This whole book has been sketching out our tendency to fight against reality. As he says here on page 215, the reason time feels like such a struggle is that we're constantly attempting to master it, to lever ourselves into a position of dominance and control over our unfolding lives so that we might finally feel safe and secure and no longer vulnerable to events. We have this dream that someday, sometime, we're going to get everything together and then life will kind of open up. And so we can feel like we're on the cusp of getting things together, having a perfect system in the productivity world. Maybe in the mental health world, it's healing, right? When I'm healed, kind of then my life will start. This dream of somehow one day getting the upper hand in our relationship with time is the most forgivable human delusion, because the alternative, that we don't have control, is so unsettling. But unfortunately, the alternative is true. And so as long as we're fighting against reality, we are doomed to fail. And it's because the quality of time is so limited that we will never be able to reach the commanding position of being able to handle every demand that be thrown your way. You'll never be able to pursue every single ambition that feels important. And instead, you will be obligated to make tough choices. And so if we have this sense that one day everything's going to open up, whether it's, okay, when I get to college, after college, when I get a job, when I get a partner, when I get married, when I have kids, when I get that promotion, when I retire, when I get the house, when I get the car, we give our freedom and our happiness in the now away as prisoners in the future. And then we get there and we're not even able to accept it. This is all that we get right here, right now. There is no time later. Later doesn't exist. It really is all right now. And this idea that we could master time has this faulty presumption that we're somehow outside of time, but we're inside of it. To master time would mean splitting off from it. But where would we go? Time is the substance I am made of, writes Jorge Luis Borges. Time is a river that sweeps me along, but I am the river. Time is the tiger which destroys me, but I am the tiger. It's the fire which consumes me, but I am the fire. There is no escape from the insecurity and the unpredictability of life. There is no later when I get everything in line. And that's one of the things that he reflects on at the end of this book, is this realization in adulthood that nobody has it together. Everybody's just flying by the seat of their pants. When we're children, it makes us feel safe to assume and project that our parents have it together, because we don't want to admit, it'd be frightening as a child to admit that our parents are not sure how life works. And so then we grow up and we realize, like, okay, well, maybe our parents don't have it together, but organizations have it together, schools have it together, newspapers have it together. And everything that I've learned in all of my work in organizations and with people is that everybody's kind of just figuring it out. But when we have these false beliefs that we need to have it together, that someday we'll have everything together, that someday we'll get things worked out, we miss life right here. As Marie-Louise von Franz, a Swiss psychologist, says, there's a strange attitude and a feeling that one is not yet in real life. For the time being, one is doing this or that, but whether it's a relationship, a job, it's not yet what we really wanted. And there's always the fantasy that somewhere in the future, the real thing will come about. The one thing dreaded throughout by such a man is to be bound to anything, whatever. There's a terrific fear of being pinned down, of entering into space and time completely, and of being the unique human that one is. I felt this so acutely in this past year. I started this Instagram in May and it blew up. It gained a lot of growth and popularity. And I had a couple of videos that went mega viral. And I started thinking, like, oh my gosh, maybe this is it, right? We talk about this fantasy that everything will open up. I thought maybe this is it. Maybe I'll have this Instagram, this social media. It'll go mega viral. I'll be able to make money to support my family, and then like the rest of life will kind of be taken care of. What I learned is that it's a lot harder than that. And then what I realized is that because I had hoped that this growth might somehow just open up and make everything easy, which surely it's provided some opportunities, but because I hoped that, because I had this fantasy, this fantasy that things would open up, even as we're talking about it now at the end of this book, I started to pursue things that actually didn't matter as much to me. And what I lost track of, what I got disconnected from, what was less relevant was actually what I'm doing here, right? Building a brick and mortar therapy practice. And so this quote here, there's a terrific fear of being pinned down, of entering space and time completely, and of being the unique human that one is. There was a point at which I realized, like, wait, like, I don't want, there's a wonderful quote. The quote is, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of cancer. And I realized that I had fallen into this cancerous mentality of trying to grow for the sake of growth. When I realized that, I had this conversation. I looked at my wife and I kind of realized, like, oh, like, no, this is where I want to be. I love sharing the things that I've learned. I love sharing the insights. I'm going to continue to do that. But I don't want to just grow for the sake of growth. I don't actually necessarily want to just try to grow. What I do want to do is I want to share. And sharing for me begins right here in my local community, building a practice, a therapy practice that can be trusted, be support for people in need. And so what we get when we let go of this fantasy, what I've gotten is the opportunity to do something real, to be alive, to be connected to life, not as I want it to be, but as it is right now. Berkman says the peace of mind on offer here is of a higher order. It lies in the recognition that being unable to escape from the problem of finitude isn't a problem. Being able to escape from our own constriction isn't a problem. It's just what life is. What makes our limitations unbearable is the belief that they could be cured. This is radical humanity, a radical embrace of limitations. There's some questions here in the comments, and I'll get to those at the end here about growth and why growth for the sake of its own sake is problematic. It has no end. That's why, because it's endless. It's purposeless. But there's this French poet, Christian Bobin, who says, this recognition. I was peeling a red apple from the garden when I suddenly understood that life would only ever give me a series of wonderfully insolvable problems. With that thought, an ocean of profound peace entered into my heart. That life will only ever give us a series of wonderful, insolvable problems. The problems are not the problems. Our problem is our unwillingness to recognize that this is what life is, to accept life on life's terms, rather than to try to make life fit into our terms. And so there's 5 questions that he gives us here on page 222, and we're reading from 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. If you want to join, you can comment book club in the comments, and I'll send you a link to my reflections in this video. But Burkeman gives us 5 questions that I think are really evocative, very, very helpful. And he also gives us this note that what's important isn't necessarily to answer the questions all the time, but sometimes it's just to live them. Sometimes sitting with the question itself is far more profound than the answer that we can find. And this is called meditative inquiry. I like to use this analogy where a lot of times in life we ask a question and then we go searching for it. And it's like we cast a pole with a hook on it, like we're fishing. We cast it out into the water. We ask this question. And then what we do is we jump into the water and swim around and try to find the answer. And when we jump in the water and we swim around and we try to find the answer to life's questions, a lot of times we scare them away. But instead, in this form of meditative inquiry, what we do is we ask the question and then we let go of the agenda to answer it. So we drop the question in the pond, we just sit with it, and then we tune into our experience, not into our intellect, we tune into our lived experience. And so there's a way that we can actually marinate with the questions that reveals things that the intellect could never reveal. So I want to invite you to kind of sit with these questions in this way here. And the first question is this: where in your life or your work are you currently pursuing comfort when what's being called for is a little bit of discomfort? And I'd welcome you to drop these in the comments as well, just your reflections and your thoughts as we're working through these things. Where in your life or your work are you currently pursuing comfort when what's being called for is a little discomfort? We have this tendency to avoid anxiety. And so when discomfort comes up, most of our decisions are reactive. We pull out our phone, we run away, we withdraw, we collapse, we react. And so it's actually not helpful to make the main question in our life when we're making big decisions. It's not helpful to make the question about what's going to make me happiest. Because when we ask the question, what's going to make me happiest in life, we will tend towards comfort and avoidance of anxiety and difficulty. And meaning is found in intentionally facing discomfort. And so James Hollis gives us this important question here. Does the choice that I'm about to make diminish me or enlarge me? Does the choice that I'm about to make call me to expand and become more and in alignment with my values, or is it going to cause me to shrink? Because when we ask what's going to make me happiest, we're going to go towards the most comfortable option, or we're just going to be paralyzed and overwhelmed. But you usually know intuitively whether maintaining a relationship or a job would present the kind of challenges that will help you grow as a person into enlargement, or the kind of challenges that will cause your soul to shrivel with every passing week in diminishment. And I love this line on page 221 from Oliver Berkman. Choose uncomfortable challenge that brings enlargement. Choose uncomfortable enlargement over comfortable diminishment wherever you can. And so if there's something in your life right now where you have to make a decision, I want to just invite you to sit with that question. Which choice diminishes me and which choice would bring me to enlarging? The second question of the 5 that he asks here is, are you holding yourself to and judging yourself by standards of productivity or performance that are just impossible to meet? And the answer over here is yes, 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 yes. I've been doing this for a long time. Because one of the things that can happen is when we believe that one day, eventually, we'll get to the point where we have it all in place, then we can postpone our goals and our dreams. And in that, we have this unreasonable standard for what we should be able to do, and so we never actually get around to doing them. The truth is that it's impossible to become so efficient and so organized that you could possibly respond to the limitless number of demands. Like, it's actually impossible. You can never answer everything. You can never do everything. You can never please everyone. You cannot do all of your hopes and dreams. You can't do whatever you want. We're limited. It's usually equally impossible to spend what feels like enough time doing our work. There's a deceptive feeling of comfort in believing that you're in the process of constructing such a life in which you get everything in order so that you can do the important things. But that's an illusion. It's a mirage. That day never comes because the day is here today. It's now. This is what we get. So he asks, what would you do differently with your time today if you knew in your bones that salvation, when everything lined up, wasn't coming? If you knew that your standards had been unreachable all along, and that you'll therefore never manage to make time for all that you hoped for. If you can't do it all, which you can't, then what would you do? Our level of performance that we're demanding is unlivable. And we can even have fears, right? Oh, well, if I don't do this, this person won't show up in my relationship, or I'll get in trouble at work, or all these things. But if the level of demands are impossible, they're impossible, no matter what catastrophe we're afraid of happening. And so what's much better is if we can drop such fantastical beliefs in ourselves and embrace radical humanity, unapologetic humanity. It's not permissiveness, but it's the recognition that I'm a mere mortal. And there's quite literally a finite amount of things that I can do in this life. And that's okay. So if I can't do everything, which I can't, what shall I choose to do? So the third question Berkman invites us to ask on page 222. In what ways have you yet to accept the fact that you are who you are and are not the person that you believe you ought to be? This is another way that we confront, that where we postpone our confrontation with our real human limitations. We say, well, I'm not as good as I should be. I'm not my ideal self. To be frank, this ideal self, think of your Hyatt, like, I hate that. It makes my stomach turn because it's not real. When we think of imagining our ideal self, it can be helpful maybe for imagery to think about who we want to become. But there is no ideal you. There is you, and that's enough. We can get so caught up in trying to prove ourselves and feeling like we have to become this person in the eyes of society, in the eyes of spirituality or religion or parents. And so we can have this sense that I'm not who I'm supposed to be yet. When I get over this, then I'll be a good person. When I get over that, I'll be a good person. We have this quest to justify our existence. You exist whether you justify it or not. And that's proof that the need to justify your existence doesn't exist. And so if you don't have to justify your existence, what would you do? There can be a peace of mind too, and this doesn't work for everybody, but Berkman says it, so I'll say it here, that it finally dawns on us that no one really cares what we're doing with our life. This is the most unsettling discovery to those of us who have lived someone else's life, disconnected from our own. But it's liberating when we realize that nobody really cares about us living our life more than we do. We are living it. And so we can try to justify our existence by living up to other people's standards. Those will go away too. And it's futile Because no matter what, I mean, here's the strange paradox. If everybody in the world accepts me, but I don't accept myself, their acceptance doesn't matter. Vice versa, if everybody in the world disapproves of me, but I can have an unconditional self-acceptance, as Albert Ellis calls it, of myself, well, then their unacceptance I'm protected from. There's no point in waiting to live your life until you've achieved the validation from someone else. And peace of mind and an exhilarating sense of freedom comes not from achieving the validation of other people, but from yielding to the reality that even if you could live up to the standards of others and be who they think you should be, it still wouldn't bring satisfaction. The strange thing is that when we actually let go of the need to prove our existence, to prove our worth, we're actually opened up to live life in a far more meaningful way. And so if we don't have to live up to the pressures of others, there's a really strange question, which is, what do you want to do? And this isn't a question of what will make you comfortable. This isn't a question of like, do whatever you want, go wherever you want, do whatever. It's a question of like, if you sit in silence in your heart of hearts, you sit with this question of, what do I like doing? What do I feel called to? What invigorates me? What enlivens me? Not what relieves my stress or what makes me feel relaxed. What do I do that is meaningful, engaging? I think that's a really good indication. I work so much in a religious community, in the Catholic community. I'm Catholic, and there can be this pervasive sense of like, what does God want me to do with my life? And I'm such a deep believer that God's plan for our life, it's not out there, it's right here. That God's plan for our life is inscribed in our hearts. And that our call is to co-author life with Him. Not to figure out what we should do, but to do what we're feeling called from the inside to do. So the fourth question here that Berkman asks us is, in which areas of our life are you holding back until you feel like you know what you're doing? As a therapist, I can tell you that throughout the years that I've been in practice, my confidence in my ability to be a therapist has not increased because of my knowledge. My confidence in being a therapist has increased because I've been able to increase the tolerance for not knowing. And that's almost mostly what therapists really are called to do, is to hold the space for uncertainty. As Eric Fromm says, our task is not to feel secure, but to tolerate insecurity. Because that's the greatest given in life, insecurity and change. Berkman talks about, and I find this so relevant too, and y'all can drop me a hands up emoji in the comments if you've seen this. Every time that I've worked at an institution, or even when it was in high school or getting to college or working in other institutions, every single time I was amazed as like, wow, this is kind of like hanging on by a thread. I was amazed by this fact that like people don't really know what they're doing. All these businesses, all these institutions, people are just kind of winging it and getting through, getting along. And so it's alarming to face this fact that we might never feel like we know what we're doing. But it's liberating too, because it can free us from this comparison. Because everybody's in this same boat where nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody's pretending. Some pretend really well to know what they're doing. Some maybe know what they're doing more than others. But at the core of it, in this human experience, there's something inextricably bound to the human experience of not knowing. And when we can allow ourselves to be comfortable in the uncomfortable of not knowing, well then, if I don't have to know who I am, I can be who I am. when I can let go of this rigid frame of identity that I'm trying to fit myself into. I can be however I am in that moment, and that's me. And this is one of my favorite definitions of personality from John Paul II. He says personality is the spontaneous expression of love. When we can let go of this pressure to know what we're doing, to have this image, well, then we can actually allow ourselves to just begin again. And that's really the core throughout all of this for me, is this skill of beginning again. And the final reflection point here is, how would you spend your days differently if you didn't care so much about seeing your actions reach fruition? If you didn't have to see the fruit, what would you do differently? He talks about the causal catastrophe, which we talked about in chapter 8, which the causal catastrophe is this belief that the only and truest value of how we spend our time is always judged on what we get out of it. This is what our culture is inundated with. We are drowning in this belief of instrumentalism, that things are good because of what they bring about. And so if you did not have to see the fruits of your labor, if you did not have to justify your work by what it produced, what would you do? What would you do if you didn't have to see the result? If what you were doing was doing it for the sake of itself, rather than for the sake of what it produces. Because these are the highest goods in our life. And he talks about a father-son team that's attempting to catalog every tree in the world's remaining ancient forests. That's crazy. It's impossible. They're never going to do that. Or an astronomer that's sitting at her desk scanning for signs of life in the solar system. But he says, within these people, they all have these shining eyes of people who know they're doing things that matter and who relish their work precisely because they don't need to produce them. They don't need to convince themselves that their contributions will provide a decisive fruit while they're alive. They're freed of the shackles of producing something because they're committed to the process rather than the product. If you never had to see the result, what would you do with your life? For me, this is most relevant for me in parenting. My commitment to myself, to my children, to the world is to heal from the pains and the hurts that I've inherited so that my children can engage in the world free from some of the baggage that I had. Some of the baggage that my parents protected me from, some of the baggage that their parents protected me from. We all inherit hurt. And so my commitment is not, to try to reach some level of mental health. My commitment is to try to heal from my hurts so that I can protect my child from inheriting them. And so the endless work that I will never see the full fruition of is healing a lineage. Not in some grand scheme of like, I'm going to do the whole thing. I'm not. But I hope to be one link in the chain. And so what actions, what acts of generosity or care for the world, what ambitions or schemes or investments in the distant future might be meaningful to undertake today if you could never come to see the results? And I'd really love to hear that. What would you do if you never had to see the outcome? What would be meaningful to do even without the outcome or without seeing it? Finally, Berkman closes here on the most necessary thing. Carl Jung was asked, how do you live the good life? How do you conduct yourself? And Jung says, your questions are unanswerable because you want to know how to live, but one lives as one can. There is no single definitive way. But the individual path, it's one that you always make for yourself, which is never prescribed, which you do not know in advance, and which simply comes into being when you put one foot in front of the other. The sole advice here is to do the next most necessary thing. And if you do with conviction the next and most necessary thing, you are always doing something meaningful. We get so caught up in this feeling, in this need to prove ourselves, to prove our worth, to figure out what am I going to do with my life. But all we really can do is the next most necessary thing. All we ever can do is what's right in front of us. And this ties in so importantly to me with one of the most valuable skills that I've learned in my life. And it's simply beginning again. The simple skill to begin again right here, moment after moment, day after day, to start over without the drama, to embrace the radical humanity that I am a mere mortal, and that's okay, to befriend my mortality and my faults and my foibles, and to work with that fact along the way, not as a permissiveness of, oh, well, I'm human, what do you expect? No, that's actually a defensiveness that's defending me because I haven't accepted this fact of my humanity. Permissiveness is a defense. But this simple skill to begin again, to start over, this is what mindfulness is about, because in each moment is brand new. This moment right here, it's never existed before. You are under no obligation, as Alan Watts says, to be who you were 5 minutes ago. You have the freedom to be here as you are. Strangely, to let go of the sense of identity that you have, that can often keep us in shackles, or the sense of identity of who you think you should be, and instead allow yourself to simply be here. And will we fall off that wagon? Yes. And this is where I love this Franciscan spirituality from St. Francis, who says, we're in this constant state of conversion, learning to consistently forgive ourselves for our humanity and to return to the most important thing, which is right here, right now. What's the next step? As C.S. Lewis says at one point, you don't need to see the whole path in front of you. You just need enough light to see the next step. It might not be the next step that you want to take, but you can almost always see the next step that you need to take just the next step right in front of you. Maybe it's just getting sleep. Maybe it's meditating. Maybe it's applying for a job. Maybe it's making a phone call. All we need to do is this next most important thing, which is just a simple next step. So thank you all. This is, if you'd like to join the email list to get a recording of this, this is 4,000 Weeks, Time Managed for Mortals. This is our book study. And I'll be sending out a reflection on Tuesday. We've got one more week. That was the last chapter, but we'll cover the afterwards. So you can comment book study below. I've seen a lot of thoughts and comments and sharing, and I'm really grateful, especially this tendency of happiness. We try to pursue happiness, and that oftentimes makes us unhappy. Jennifer said that she would sing if she could sing, if there was no pressure. I hope you're singing today, to just bring brightness, to have commitment and passion. And so if you're interested in getting on the email list, Comment Book Club, I'll send you this, and then there's a link to the other videos as well on my YouTube page. I share a reflection like this, and then you can actually find the other email reflections as well. But thank you so much for being here. This book really has changed my life. It's 4,000 Weeks, Time Managed for Mortals by Oliver Burkeman. It's been a pleasure to do this book study. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's been a pleasure to do this book study with y'all. And so, yeah, thank you for being here. And I hope you can take the next best step. And tune in next week, Friday, 12:15, and we will continue walking together. So thank you all for being here. And take good care. Comment Book Club if you want to join the email list. And I'll see you next week. Peace.